Imagine waiting 2 weeks to know if you got a like or not, or a thumbs up. In the decades before the internet, people made comics, and we reached out to each other. What was it like? This is the Sequential Artists Workshop, and these are the 90s mini comics oral history archives. Come join us as we take a longer look at those analog days when communication was a lot slower, maybe more deliberate, maybe more reckless. Who knows? It was just different. Join us as we take a look and really notice how much things have changed. Come join us on the socials. Sometimes it's Comics Workshop, sometimes it's Saw Comics. Either way, come check us out and welcome.
All right. Hi, everyone. This is our next episode on our 90s mini comics oral history archive project. Today we are meeting with Eli Bishop. Uh, it's a pleasure to meet you and work with
You
you.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of got us started, but for our intro, can you please say your name, the date, and where you are recording from?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Eli Bishop, and it's December 17th, 2024. I'm in San Francisco.
Nice. And what are some comics publications that you created or were a part of during the either pre-internet era or early internet era?
Yeah, it's pretty much early internet, I guess, like pre-social media, pre-everyone being online, because I started really trying to do comics, I guess, in the second half of the 90s. And between there and like the early 2000s, I put out about a half dozen, maybe like tiny format mini comics, usually just single stories. I think the first one was one called The Therapist. I did a few series issues of a series called An Inside Job, that was a bunch of short dream comics. And then I think the first time I was in anyone else's uh, comic or book was a collection called Bogus Dead that I was in like 2001, I think.
Cool. All right. And what locations were you working out of during this time?
New York City. I was in Manhattan and Brooklyn for the whole
Nice.
90s until 2003.
Great. And how would you describe your comics work?
It's all over the place. Some of it is personal or serious or morbid. Some of it is very goofy. There's some adaptations. There's some just humor stuff, some fantasy stuff. It's almost all really pretty short pieces. So it's usually been either in anthologies that are either like my own collection or somebody else's collection.
All right. Well, that'll bring us onto the comics production section. Can you tell us how you made your comics, what tools you used, etc.?
Very awkwardly. Um, I mean, probably like a lot of people, I'd never seen anybody doing this. It was just kind of stuff I'd heard of. So think I started out trying to draw everything with rapidograph technical pens, which are these very, a little bit pricey and difficult to take care of pens, but you can get this very like precise line that I thought was cool. But then I started trying to draw in ink with a brush because I had read about that being a thing that like real cartoonists did. I didn't really like it, but I tried, and then I gradually just ended up getting more into using either nib pens like Hunt or Speedball, like metal nibs, and then sometimes just like cheap marker pens like a Micron or whatever, or sometimes just drawing in pencil. And this was all on Bristol board paper. Usually I would either be drawing at an overly large size that I didn't really need to, just thinking it would be cool to shrink it down, or else I just work like ridiculously small. And I knew enough that like I knew you work in pencil first and then you ink it and erase it. I would tend to get impatient with the pencils and just start inking it before I could really see what I was doing. So then I would mess up and put white out all over it. I would do lettering with either markers or nibs or epigraphs directly onto the art. And that was pretty much eyeballing the lettering. I had heard of lettering guide tools, but I didn't really ever use them. And then the other thing I was into in the 90s was the Zipatone or Letratone shading film, the dot patterns that you would cut out and stick on. And I think I had seen that being used in some black and white comics that I liked. I know that Tom Hart used to do it. I think the early Eddie Campbell comics had a lot of it. I thought it was fun. And then I can't get rid of anything. So until a few years ago, I still had some of these really old, crappy pieces of that stuff, like in a drawer where it would turn yellow and would never stick on anymore. But I just couldn't throw it away.
All right, awesome. And then how would you ready your comics for print?
So for the first few years, I was spending a lot of time in the copy shop and cutting up a lot of stuff. It would be like I'd have this page of art, I'd go to the copy shop, make a photocopy that I would usually then shrink down to a smaller size, then be cutting up those copies so I could paste them up onto a layout like with rubber cement. I was usually having to rearrange and cut up things because I would tend to like originally draw a story as if it was going to be on a regular size comics page and have a lot of panels, and then decide I was actually going to make it into a mini comic with very small pages with just like 1 to 3 panels on a page, which was partly because I liked like little booklets, but also I think I just liked having more pages because I it was hard for me to write a comic that was more than like 3 pages long, but then I could still have a 20-page book. Um, and so along with that, I was also like uh, making it into a double-sided layout. So like if it was a if you had a 20-page thing where each page was folded in half, a sheet was folded in half, then you'd have to figure out that like page one and page 20 would be on one side together, and then on the other side is page two and page 19, and so on. The easiest way I would figure that out is just fold some pages and write numbers on them. Um, and so I'd be making these layouts, and then I would have something that I could just go and make a bunch of copies on letter size paper. I wasn't very good at planning this stuff, so I kept picking these small page sizes that were not like round numbers, um, because I just said like I want it to be 3 by 5. I like that shape of a rectangle, but then that meant that after folding it, I'm gonna have to cut it on 3 sides. So um, I eventually stopped doing that.
All right, and then how would you print them?
First, those first couple of years, that was all the copy shop. I would just go in. I'd have all these pasted up layouts, and then um, usually didn't. I don't think most of the copy machines would do double-sided like automatically. So I would like put all the side one pages through, and then I'd take the stack of copies out, flip them over, put them back into the machine, and copy the other sides. And the covers were usually just like, well, they were always just photocopied on also, but on like colored heavier paper or something. Um, Once in a while, I would try something fancier. I was lucky enough to meet some people who were into letterpress printing and actually helped me like make a couple of cool prints for one of the earlier things, which I thought was extremely cool, but that was a lot of work, and you had to have the equipment. So, um, yeah, I after a couple of years, I did start being able to use the computer more. So I still didn't have like uh, I would still be usually printing stuff at the copy shop, but I might like scan the art and do the moving around of stuff that way instead of cutting it up.
Yeah. All right. Do you remember how many you printed of your first comic?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, probably too many. I hadn't really thought about like what was realistic. I am guessing I probably made 40 or 50 copies and then, had those around for a long time. One thing that kept happening is I would move, and I had been putting my address on the comic because I mean, I guess we'll talk later about the mail order and stuff, but I'd have either my address or a post office box, and then I'd realize like, well, now I've moved and I have to decide whether to throw those covers out, or just cross it out and write it write another address, or just print another one.
Yeah.
Um, and eventually, I I don't know. I think I usually just ended up printing like fairly small amounts, a couple dozen at a time, because it was just as easy to print more of them. Uh, and you can't save any money if you're just like, if you're using a real printer, print shop, professional order, you could get like a volume discount. But if you're just making photocopies, they all cost the same.
Well, that'll bring us into our noticing and awareness section. Can you tell us when you first saw evidence of people making their own comics?
You mean as in self-publishing, or
Just
just
anytime
general?
you first saw people, yeah, anytime you
Well,
first
like
just
literally seeing
see.
people, that was very late, but I'd heard about it. I spent so actually even before I was in New York and when I was just like in high school, I was reading a lot of anything I could find about like comics that I considered to be cool, which was basically like art comics and indie stuff and whatever, because I'd found out about the Comics Journal, which was kind of my main information source for all of that. And so I they would I mean they covered a big range of things, and not most of it was not like small press or self-published stuff, but they'd get into that sometimes. And so I think I kind of had a sense of it from that. Like I probably heard the term mini comic, maybe in that setting. I'm not sure, because there were in the 80s there were a couple of people who kind of became known for doing these kind of unusual small press things, but I hadn't really seen any of them. I just liked the idea, and then and I was also into like some stuff I'd found out about in the 80s, like Raw. Um, that was a big focus for kind of experimental stuff, even though to me that stuff was all like kind of over my head and out of my league. Like I thought a lot of it was cool, but I didn't think of it as a thing you could do, because these people seemed to be very I don't know, they were either like way more punk than me, or they were like extremely good graphic designers or whatever. So it still seemed to me like that's kind of fancy stuff. Um, and I think that I hadn't been to any like comics fairs or anything for a long time. So in the 90s, I think I started to see some like little zine stuff and so on, just at one of the stores that I would go to. It was a place called Jim Hanley's Universe that was a real big, uh, great store. And um, I I still just had a very vague idea of like who was out there and what they were doing in terms of like anyone that I didn't think of as like a professional. Um, but uh, I think mostly I started actually talking to people more and paying more attention to what they were doing, because of the internet. Really, this was like old days when um, there were just, some websites had like a message board, and the Comics Journal had a message board that was got a pretty fair amount of traffic. There were some people who like to hang out on and talk on it a lot. And it was like a real wide range of like there were some professionals on there. There were a lot of just fans. There were a lot of people just starting to try to do comics. And then there were like weird cranks and trolls and whatever. But that was real, I think, helpful in just kind of just getting an idea that there were a lot of people out there doing things in a lot of different ways. And so I got more curious. And I think maybe partly through that and partly through like something I read in the journal or whatever, um, I realized like, oh, you can order a lot of this stuff through the mail. So I think I wasn't like super active with that, but I did find out about some things that way. And I think, oh, also, actually, I had been exposed like real early as a kid, to American Splendor by Harvey Pekar, um, which that was like totally over my head and not like something I mean, it was like slice of life grown up stuff that I had no concept of, but I could tell there was something definitely cool about it. And here's this sort of odd guy who's just doing his own thing. It still seemed to me like this is a real magazine, it's like professionally published and so on. So I I didn't really have a sense of like how was this done, but I did get that like, oh, sometimes this is just someone's weird project. So I think that was one of the earliest kind of things like that I ran into. And and yeah, I hadn't really seen anything that I would call like a mini comic, like something that didn't look like a regular size comic with a glossy cover or something, until pretty late because I'd finally actually met a cartoonist. I think that the first one was Dean Haspiel, who was a guy in Brooklyn, and he happened to be on the Comics Journal message board. And so at some point he's like, "Dude, oh, you're in New York? Yeah, we should hang out. And I'll show you some comics and whatever." Um, Dean was kind of like a million times more extroverted person than me, so I kind of like it was very hard to like dare to talk to anybody, but he was very nice, and he kind of got that I was like floundering around trying to figure out what to do. And one thing he had was like a box of mini comics he had picked up at different shows over the years and didn't want anymore. So he's like, maybe you want to check these out. Um, and a lot of that stuff was not good, but it was all super interesting. There's a few things in there that were like extremely interesting, and I think one of those was probably Joe Chiapetta's Silly Daddy, which that was I was really fascinated with that because like one, it was just super idiosyncratic. Like he didn't draw like anybody else. The writing was like it was just about a completely different kind of comic from one part to another. But it also had a lot of like personal stuff, and then it would be like this funny fantasy thing. And it did look like a regular comic in that it was, it was like printed, it had a regular cover and so on. Um, but in every other way, it just like it was so clearly like someone's just their own thing. And I think that and he was definitely part of like a bunch of um, zine type people who would all have like other like reviews of other people's comics and maybe like their address in the back of the book so you could find out what else to check out. So I think I started at that point, um, checking out a few more things. And I think some of the early ones are Jenny Zervaka's Strange Growths, um, and then some of the people who were a lot of these people ended up being in some of these collections like Bogus Dead, which I was eventually in, or the zine Not My Small Diary that had tons of different cartoonists in it. So I'm not really sure when all that came about, but like over a couple of years in the late 90s, I sort of all of a sudden um, got much more of a interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I finally actually, like after I'd met Dean, I found then through him a whole lot of people who were living in Brooklyn. And actually, by coincidence, I had moved real close to where Tom Hart and Leila Corman were. So they were kind of the people that I saw the most, and then a lot of others that they knew in that area.
Nice. All right. Well, did you ever read an issue of Fact Sheet 5 back then?
Yeah, not a lot. I'd heard about it early on. I finally uh, checked it out a few times, and I was a little overwhelmed by like the sheer quantity, and also that I don't know, I felt like all these people are cooler than me, and I'm not sure I want to see how many zines are out there because I don't know. It was super interesting, but I didn't really like try very hard to check all those things out. I was mostly interested in comics. And once in a while, I did order a couple of non-comics zines, and some of those would then also talk about comics, and I'd find things out through that. But Yeah, I think I only had a couple issues of Fact Sheet 5, and maybe borrowed some from someone else too.
Yeah. Did you ever advertise in something like Fact Sheet 5, Comics FX,
Um,
anything?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I did sometimes send out a couple of things, hoping that someone would review them.
Hmm.
And so I don't think I was in Fact Sheet 5, but I think there were a couple of like other people's zines that had a review section. And so I got very excited at one point, that to get mentioned in there. I, and also since I would almost never get anyone ordering something through the mail, otherwise I could always tell if, that there was a review and then suddenly two people ordered a comic.
Yeah. All right. Well, that'll then bring us to our community section. Can you tell us a story of how you met your closest friend or peer in comics?
Um, Well, like the whole time that I was in New York, and I was really only like got to know any cartoonists in the last few years that I was there. Um, but I was also still extremely shy. And so even though I was hanging out around a lot of these nice people, I wouldn't say that I got to know them super well. Um, or at least, yeah, I was just, I don't know. Everyone was super interesting to me, but I didn't know how to talk about comics or anything. So it's more like after I moved out to the West Coast, that I was actually getting to know people a little better. But still, I don't know. Certainly the person I had probably hung out the most with in that first couple of years was Dean, and uh, the way we actually met was not immediately because he had said, "Oh yeah, you should totally like this artist you should meet, and let's hang out and come to this guy's party." So I went to this party in Brooklyn of a bunch of illustrators I'd never met, and Dean did not show up. So I just had to sort of talk to random people, and I don't know if that was his strategy or not, but after that, and then we'd kind of hang out at a life drawing class that one of them was doing for a while. So that was kind of like the most effort that I really made in that regard for a while. And then I would just sort of randomly be at Tom and Leela's place sometimes if they were having people over. But yeah, I don't know. I think I had just come out of my shell a little bit more by the time I got out to San Francisco, and so there was a whole other group of people out there doing mini comics and small press stuff and so on. And like this was in like 2003 and four, and probably the main people that I knew then were like Jesse Reclaw and Reese Harp, and a bunch of people who knew them and hung out at their place.
Yeah. All right. Well, can you tell us about maybe the first show or con situation where you saw other people doing what you did?
Um, I think that the first con I ever saw was in San Francisco, but before I lived there, it would have been in um, probably 2000, I think. And I had been coming out here to visit a couple of times because I had friends here and some family, and I thought it was cool, but I hadn't checked out any comic stuff. And then Tom Hart said, I'm going to be at this show and I have a table, but I don't need all of that space. So do you want to just split the table? So I thought that was very cool. And I brought my tiny little suitcase. All of my things were so small that I decided that was just kind of like my gimmick, I guess. And I'd found like a tiny suitcase that I could just display them all inside. So I was sitting at one half of Tom's table at the Alternative Press Expo, APE, which was a show that I think started out in San Jose, then it moved up to San Francisco and became quite big for a while, and then kind of moved back and kind of withered away. But at that time, it was kind of in its heyday, and I thought that was just great. It was a lovely place because it was that year they were in Fort Mason, in up by the water, and It's this cool, like spacious building and all these tables, and I was just like, I I couldn't tell whether I should stay at the table or walk around. Either way, I was nervous because if I was walking around, I was overwhelmed by how much stuff was there. And but then I would worry that I should be at my table. But then if I'm at my table, I have to like make eye contact with people who are like looking at the comics, and I don't know. I think that's honestly, I've never gotten over that. If someone, I think it's pretty common actually, like you sit at a table and you don't really know whether to try to make conversation just because someone like stopped and looked at your comic for a second, or will they ever buy anything? But anyway, it made a big impression on me, and I met a few um, of the people I later got to know out west. And then I didn't do anything like that again for a while. There wasn't anything like it in New York, which in hindsight was kind of weird. There were a lot of very cool people doing like small press comics and mini comics in New York, but there just hadn't really been an event. Right, the last couple years I was living there, they someone finally tried to get one together, which was I think is still going. It was the MoCA, the Museum of Cartoon and Comic Art, which was not actually a museum yet at that point, but they used that name to do a show. But the other thing that made a big impression was in 2001. So the thing that a lot of people in New York would go to, since there was nothing in New York, was the Small Press Expo, SPX in Maryland. And that was like a big annual thing, and it sounded very cool. I had never gone, and I finally uh, was thinking I might manage to do it. But it was taking place in mid-September. And so in that year, we had the terrorist disaster, and nothing was going to happen. No one's flying anywhere for sure at that point. So there were all these people that I knew in Brooklyn who were just kind of like stunned and bummed out in every way, but also in this particular way of like, well, shit, now I can't even go to SPX. It was like a weird thing to be, focusing on, but at the same time, it was like, uh,
Yeah.
that was a community thing. Um, and so someone, I wish I could remember who did this, but someone got the idea like, well, we could just like put on like a book fair in like a large garage here, which they did. And so it was kind of the first time people there had gotten to do something like that locally that I knew of, at least. And it was a really sweet little event, and I think it really kind of helped bring the community a little more into focus.
Yeah, that's great.
In fact,
Um,
I've got the poster here up on my wall. I don't know
oh,
if this is visible, but that's the event that never happened. It's this lovely poster art by Nick Bertozzi, and that was SPX that didn't exist.
all right. Well, it's cool you have memorabilia from that.
Yeah. Yeah, this was, I mean, not from the garage show. This was from the
Yeah.
Maryland
Yeah.
show, but it was canceled. Yeah.
All right. Well, can you tell us when you felt maybe the most connected in the community or the least connected or both?
I think honestly that garage show really, like, even though I didn't know a lot of the people very well, there was there was something kind of special about it. They called it SP Exiles. And people just had like folding tables or just like a blanket on the floor or something. And I mean, I'm sure there were zine events and stuff. I'd actually seen like I'd gone to like one thing that wasn't a comics thing. It was like zine and book artists and so on. And that seemed cool, but it didn't seem as accessible to me. So that was one of those times. I mean, especially because, like I said, everyone was pretty traumatized anyway. But otherwise, like, I mean, also, again, I was just kind of a reclusive wallflower a lot of the time. So even though I was very happy to, be able to hang out around some people, I I wasn't really super in touch with what was going on like in the community. I guess there was another. one time when got together and got to actually like draw around each other was someone had organized a 24-hour comics challenge, which is kind of like a stunt that had become popular around that time of try to just stay up for 24 hours, and at the end of it you start from scratch, and at the end you have the 24 pages of whatever, and just try to smash it out in that time and not really plan anything. And I was not able to do that. Uh, also I was like, the other thing was going on is that I had at the same time finally finished college and got a, a, a professional job, which I was a hospital nurse. And I was like working night shift and super stressed out all the time and like super exhausted. So when I tried to do the 24-hour comic, it was just like I was I was ready to die after a couple hours. But it was still very cool to like I hadn't that was probably the first time I'd really been around a lot of people literally drawing, instead of just talking about comics.
Yeah.
And just a lot of the same kind of people I knew in Brooklyn. I felt a little bad because they were being much more productive than I was, but it was still cool.
Yeah. All right. Who would you say were slash are your most significant peers in comics?
Um, I was confused by this question reading it because I don't know what significant means.
Significant,
For
not in terms of like fame or anything, more so
oh boy.
significant in maybe how they
Well,
impacted you, your career, your art.
I mean, yeah, probably the best known people that I knew would have been like Tom and Leela and Dean and a couple people in those circles, Josh Neufeld, Jessica Abel, Matt Madden, some people you've interviewed. Those are just kind of all people I met around that time. And I I mean I've gotten to know a lot of other people since then. I don't know if you're still talking about the 90s though, that would probably be it. Um,
All right. Did you ever do collaborations or draw jams with these? You mentioned would do like life drawing
That
sessions.
was kind of well, yeah, the life drawing class that was mostly not cartoonist, but yeah, the only time I really attempted at that point was, which wasn't really collaborative, but it was like people hanging out together, was that 24-hour comic event.
Yeah.
Um, like right at the end of my time in New York, I think there was a little bit more of like people actually hanging out and at a cafe or a bar or something and doing jams and stuff. So I had a little bit of contact with that, but not as much till I came out of San Francisco. I think yeah. Also, honestly, I've never been good at jam comics. They just make me freeze up. What we did more of when once I was out here was the kind of thing where everyone just gets a prompt and just makes up some bullshit on the spot in like a very short time, like a 2-minute comic or a 5-minute comic, and then those get collected together into a mini comic. I have quite a few of those from like 2003 and 2004. But maybe people were doing that back in Brooklyn, but I wasn't around for it.
All right. And how would you say that your community affected your own work?
I'm super impressionable, so anything that I see that I find impressive, I just will immediately decide that I should be doing that, which is maybe not the best way to approach it, but I mean, I just feel like I was I was lucky to be exposed to like a whole lot of different kinds of things that I was found all super interesting, even if I didn't really know how they went together or how I would begin to do that. But I mean, all of those people in Brooklyn, in one way or another, like I was really fascinated with like a particular kind of thing that they were, as far as I could tell, doing better than anybody else. So if I was reading like one of Tom's comics, I just thought everything should be like that, or one of Leila's or Jessica's or Vanessa Davis or anything. Like people just had such different ways of working and writing, and that was that was really just super inspirational to me. Even I can't say exactly what the effect was. I mean, I think eventually, like after years and years, I just got more comfortable like trying things uh, and just also more comfortable revising things. One thing I found super, I think this is common when you're sort of starting out on your own and you're just kind of trying to imitate stuff or just like you feel like you have these ideas, but you don't want to do anything until you know exactly what it is.
Mhm.
And so I would kind of dither around for a long time till I had what I thought was a great idea, then try to draw it all at once and then get very frustrated. Um, and I think that just seeing the amount of stuff people were willing to try, especially when you're working like in a zine or mini comic format where it's just lower stakes, and you have more control and so there was a spontaneity to just a lot of these people's work that was a huge relief to me. Like I still really liked other kinds of comics that were more uh, polished in different ways, but I didn't understand how those were done.
Yeah.
Um, and also, there were just certain kinds of stories that just weren't going to be done in those. Um, so I don't know. I think just kind of the sense of freedom in general. Uh, Also getting to see just like how much you could do with very simple tools, like the fact that just there are all these people working in like small format black and white stuff that all looked completely different and had such a range of effects. Just I mean like visual effects, emotional effects. I Yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Can you tell us maybe how you traded or sold your comics?
Pretty rarely. I sold well because I wasn't going to events really, except for those two things. Actually, I was at the Mocha show too, so three things. But other than that, I had some stuff at so Jim Lee Hanley's Universe was this comic store in Manhattan. They had a little rack that was it was like a big store, and most of it was like mainstream comics. But then there would be um, this rack that, like, to their credit, they didn't put it like way off in the corner. It was pretty easy to see, and so it'd have a variety of self-published things, and then my stuff was usually like on this one shelf on the top where all of the things that were like funny, very small sizes would be, which was actually probably an advantage because if at least it was on the top, otherwise it'd be invisible. So I would sell things there once in a while. I think that I think they would buy them outright. I mean, a lot of places that have such a rack would like take things on consignment. So, you'd just hand over some and then you'd maybe find out later if some of them sold and you get some money. But I think they would actually just buy them, which was a big deal to me, even though it was a couple of bucks. Also, I was selling these like absurdly cheap, even for the 90s. I mean, I think my first one was like $1. Um, and I don't know, I guess I was pretty much just trying to break even on the photocopies. Um, and I'd get through the mail once in a while an order, which was very cool. I wouldn't always know like where they found out about it or whatever, but that was pretty much it. I guess I probably traded some stuff sometimes. I was a little self-conscious about that because I sort of didn't feel like my things were, what if my comic is not as good as their comic? It's not a fair trade. Uh, so I probably usually just bought them. Um, but yeah, so it was that, and then I think, um, I mean, at the time I was online, but there was no way to order something that way. Someone could email me and say like, where should I send the money? And then they'd send it in the mail, and I'd mail the comic. but it was all pretty rare. It was pretty slow, but it was very exciting whenever it would happen.
Yeah. All right. Did you ever feel particularly connected to a store or venue that supported you in your community?
Um, I mean, Jim Hanley's was a big thing. I think a lot of people felt that way. I didn't know the owner well or anything, but it was just kind of that was the place that had the most of that kind of thing going on. There was a store I hung out a lot at in Manhattan, St. Mark's Comics. It was just a cool comic store. It was very small. I don't think they ever had any of my stuff, but I was comfortable there. Um, that's about it. I mean, I think there's just more of everything now. I mean, it just felt like, again, for the amount of artists that were there, it still felt like a little bit of a weird desert sometimes, like just kind of can't see where stuff is or have an event or whatever. So um, I probably more people, more of the people in those circles in Brooklyn that I ever saw their work, I just saw it because I was there, like they brought it to a party or something. Um, but yeah, that's about it. I'm a little envious now because I think there's cooler stores now in New York, but there's good ones here too.
Yeah. All right. Were you ever a part of any kind of distribution collective like Puppy Toss?
Not not then. I think I vaguely knew there were such things, but
Mhm.
don't think I ever had contact with them. I think, well, Puppy Toss was on the West Coast, right?
I believe
Um,
so.
and and then a little later there was Global Hobo, which I actually, a few years later, I was running that briefly. That was in San Francisco. Um, but yeah, I didn't really catch on to that until like I was out west. And I'm not really sure how much was going on in the 90s. I'm sure there was some, but I would have loved to. That would have been a cool way to find out about things, and also to sell comics. But yeah, I wasn't really clued into it. It was pretty much sort of individual mail order.
Yeah. All right. Um, well then that'll bring us into our wrap-up section. So what do you miss about that time?
Um, well, I wish I saw those people more often. There's people that I just kind of since then have just seen once in a while at shows. Uh, but I think there was something about like the couple of years that I was living in Greenpoint, where uh, Tom and Leela were, and like some other people were close by. That was just a I liked I liked the area. I liked being able to like walk over there and hang out. And I it was also a huge relief to me from my work life at the time and my like personal life. So, even though I wasn't really like being very productive with comics or very uh, socially able to communicate, I would still much rather be in hanging out than like working at the hospital at the time. Um, and just the feeling of discovery. I mean, I was just kind of going from like, well, I feel like I'm all on my own and there's some stuff out there somewhere to like within a couple of years, just, you know, coming in contact with everything. So some of it is just like, I think the being young thing. And uh, I don't really miss living in New York, like personally, but that was the best part of it.
Yeah.
Um, and I miss the postal stuff. It was cool to. I mean, I've always just liked like I don't know, getting envelopes and in the mail and sticking stamps on things, and uh, especially if it was like I wrote to some town I'd never heard of in the Midwest, and got back something cool, or just some stranger, send me $2. Um, and Yeah, so yeah, I have nostalgia for that for sure. I don't have any nostalgia for the way I was like the creative stuff I was doing exactly. Like I was happy to to do some of it's like was fun, like once it was done, but the process was so agonizing because I just couldn't decide how I wanted to work and I couldn't stand to plan things out and so on. So it was always just like uh, needlessly difficult. And I was very uptight about my standards of what I thought I ought to be able to do. So all that stuff got much better later, but yeah, at the time it was just like suddenly realizing that there was this little core of stuff going on right there, and then just people sort of all over the country uh, when you couldn't just go online and sort of get the big picture of that. Um, that was good.
Yeah. All right. Well, can you give us maybe one more memory or anecdote from that time?
Uh, uh, well, the best I think I probably already covered most of them as far as like the garage show and Dean not showing up at the thing he invited me to. And yeah, I don't know. The 24-hour comic thing was like that was very funny in hindsight. I was miserable at the time because I was just so sleep deprived and I was trying to do this like ridiculously ambitious comic. Many years later, I actually started trying to do that same comic again, like in a much longer form, and I'm still working on it. It might be a real thing, but at the time I was like way beyond my
Hmm.
ability because I all I could think of was, well, 24 pages, 24 hours. I've got to do something that's like I have to find some kind of structure or system for this because otherwise I that's the only way I can have an idea. So because I was working this night shift job at this hospital, I decided that it would be like it would take place in 24 hours and every page would be an hour and every page would have four parallel comic strips on it that are four different characters in different places at the same time and including like these nurses who are at the job or on different shifts and so on. And I think I got about 3 pages of that done, even close to started. Um, and then just I could barely get home. I was so exhausted. But in the middle of that, we just like what everybody got up and late at night and went out to the diner and just had a bunch of coffee and so on. And I'm like, well, this is cool, but I'm still definitely not getting this comic done. Um, but everyone was sitting around on the floor. I think I'm not sure it might have been Ellen Linder's apartment. And yeah, I just thought this would be cool to do sometime when I'm actually able to do it.
All right. Well, then our last question would be, can you tell us three people who we should contact for these archives?
Yeah. Let's see. So, I think you should definitely talk to Jesse Recklaw, who is now in Portland. And I think if you haven't already, you should talk to Jenny Zervakis. Um, and there's someone I really doubt that you can find, but it would be cool if you could. And I also don't know if she would even want to talk about comics or say that she'd been doing comics, but there was an extremely interesting um, sort of book artist, zine artist, cartoonist in who was active in the 90s and early 2000s called Molly Barker. Um, she made these real beautiful little booklets, and I for a while managed to distribute them through when I was part of the distro out here. But I think I don't know. I think she ended up mostly painting and hadn't been in touch for a long time. But I'd be super curious to hear what she was doing.
All right. Well, that'll wrap up our interview. Do you have any final thoughts?
This is a cool series. I want to see who else you've got. Yeah, I don't know. No, I don't have any final thoughts, but thank you.
Cool. And where can our viewers find more of your work or more about you?
Oh yeah. Well, if you look up my name online, there's one other guy online a lot who has that name, but he doesn't do comics. He plays the violin, I think, and so the other one would be me. My website is at errorbar.net, ERRORBAR, and I'm on Instagram. Um, and Yeah, that's about it. I mean, I have put some stuff out like pretty irregularly. I do have like you will find some of my mini comics sometimes in distros. And but I lately I have to say I haven't been trying super hard, so I'm trying to finish another issue of kind of a large one now. But I guess if you look at my website or my Instagram, then you'll eventually find out if I do that or not.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic. And to our viewers, we hope we see you in the next one.
Yay. All right.
Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find us on social media at Comics Workshop and online at sawcomics.org. You can hear about our many courses at learn.sawcomics.org. SAW is a nonprofit and supported by people like you. Learn how to make a tax-deductible donation at the donate page of sawcomics.org. You can join our free community of comics explorers at members.sawcomics.org. Thanks so much for being here.